So we pass over invisible lines on a map like every single day without really thinking about them.
Yeah, you just drive right over them.
Right. You drive down a street, the pavement changes slightly, maybe the style of the street signs looks a bit different, and that's usually the extent of it.
Most people don't even notice.
Exactly. But what if one of those invisible lines completely dictated the wealth, the architecture, and, well, the entire future of a major region? Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a really fascinating set of materials on real estate history today.
It's a great topic.
It really is. Specifically, we are zeroing in on a pivotal moment in 1851, the separation of Baltimore City and Baltimore County. We're going to explore how that one boundary drawn over a century and a half ago created a massive and lingering economic impact.
An impact that is actively driving property values today.
Right this second. It drives institutional investment strategies. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because it might sound like just some obscure bit of local history, but it is actively shaping millions of dollars in real estate.
It absolutely is. And setting the stakes right at the top is crucial here. For anyone listening, understanding this specific boundary isn't just an exercise in historical trivia.
No, not at all.
It is a masterclass in how local government structure directly shapes modern property values. It shapes demographic shifts and regional capital flows. You really cannot fully grasp East Coast real estate dynamics without understanding this specific geographic quirk.
So to understand the quirk, we have to start with the historical catalyst. The year is 1851.
Right.
Baltimore City officially separates from Baltimore County. They basically get a divorce. How common is that setup in the U.S.? Because, I mean, I always assumed cities were just the dense centers of the counties they sit in.
You assumed that because it's how almost the entire country operates.
Right.
The 1851 separation created what is known as an independent city. Aside from a quirk in Virginia's state constitution that creates smaller independent cities, Baltimore is a massive anomaly in the United States.
So they become entirely distinct.
Yes, two completely distinct sovereign municipal entities. And this created an immediate and glaring geography problem. Following the split and a few subsequent adjustments, Baltimore City was ultimately left with a fixed area of roughly 80 square miles of land.
Okay, 80 square miles.
Meanwhile, Baltimore County, the separate municipal entity completely surrounding it, retained about 682 square miles.
80 square miles for the urban center and nearly 700 for the surrounding ring. That is a wild discrepancy in land mass.
What's fascinating here is that while most major U.S. cities continually annex surrounding county land as their population and economies grow.
Like Houston or Phoenix.
Exactly. Cities like Houston that just keep sprawling outward and absorbing the suburbs into their tax base. But Baltimore didn't do that. Once the final lines were drawn and solidified, the urban core literally froze in place geographically.
Whoa.
The city had fixed hard boundaries while the county essentially enjoyed unlimited potential for outward growth.
It makes me think of planting a tree. If you plant a tree in a tiny rigid pot, that's Baltimore City with its 80 square miles. No matter how much water or sunlight you give it, its root system can only go so far before it gets root-bound.
That's a great analogy.
And usually, a completely root-bound houseplant will eventually just exert enough pressure to crack the ceramic pot. But a city can't crack a state-mandated legal border.
It's locked in.
Right. Meanwhile, right next to it, you plant another tree directly into the sprawling soil of a massive backyard. That's the Villa County. That second tree has endless room to spread out, build new root networks, and grow as large as it wants.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. And that root-bound reality sets the stage for a dramatic domino effect, particularly when we look at the mid-20th century.
It's post-war boom.
By the time the post-World War II boom hit, the divide between the two jurisdictions became starkly physical. You had the county with its vast tracts of undeveloped farmland and forests actively building the future.
They had a blank canvas.
Exactly. They were carving out much larger residential lots, laying out brand new sprawling school campuses. They were carving wider roads designed for the automobile and installing state-of-the-art water and sewer systems from scratch.
Which is exactly what the post-war American consumer was looking for. But what is the city doing during this same period? They can't expand. Are they just trapped trying to retrofit their existing 80 square miles?
That's exactly it. The city is stuck trying to maintain aging 19th century infrastructure. They are dealing with older housing stock, incredibly dense row house districts, and legacy zoning that often placed heavy industrial manufacturing right next to residential neighborhoods.
So if you are a post-war family comparing your options, the Coin County practically offers a different century of living.
It does. But it wasn't just the physical appeal of new construction that drove the market, it was the underlying financial structure.
Mhm.
This brings us to a massive driver of modern real estate behavior: municipal taxes.
Right, because if you have an older self-contained jurisdiction, your regulatory costs and public service obligations have to be higher. You're maintaining century-old pipes and a denser urban population.
Precisely. And remember, because they can't annex the newly wealthy suburbs, they cannot capture that new tax revenue. Baltimore County, on the other hand, could spread its new infrastructure costs over a much larger geographic area and a rapidly expanding population base.
That makes sense.
The result is a staggering tax disparity that persists today. The city property tax rate is roughly double the county's rate.
Wait, let me stop you there because that seems like a death spiral. If the city's taxes are double, wouldn't the city government just lower them to attract people back across the border? Or are they just mathematically trapped by their own infrastructure costs?
They are mathematically trapped. You cannot simply cut your tax rate in half when you have the fixed overhead of a legacy water system, public transportation networks, and legacy pension obligations for municipal workers.
The bills still have to be paid.
Exactly. The cost of running the city doesn't shrink just because the tax base shrinks. So the rate stays high, which pushes more people out, which then concentrates the tax burden on those who remain.
So what did this do to the demographics over the latter half of the century?
The shift is monumental. In 1950, Baltimore City's population was pushing 1 million residents, peaking around 950,000.
Okay.
But by 1980, it dropped to about 786,000. And today, it sits around 565,000.
That is a huge drop.
While the city shrank by hundreds of thousands of people, the county's population exploded as that middle-class migration accelerated heavily through the 60s and 70s.
And looking at the sources, it seems crucial to understand the institutional drivers behind that migration too, not just the desire for a bigger yard. We're talking about massive federal intervention in the housing market, right?
Yes. The historical data is very clear on this. The Federal Housing Administration, or FHA, and other agencies at the time implemented policies that structurally favored suburban mortgage lending over urban investment.
How did that work mechanically?
From a purely mechanical standpoint, if a buyer wanted a 30-year fixed mortgage to purchase a newly built suburban house, in the county federal policies made that capital highly accessible and heavily subsidized.
And if they wanted a city house?
Conversely, if a buyer or investor wanted to secure a loan to purchase or rehab an older urban row house in the city, the capital was much harder and often impossible to secure due to the lending guidelines of the era.
So it's a powerful combination. You have shifting consumer preferences, the draw of suburban school districts, the rise of the automobile, making commuting viable, paired directly with federal lending policies that literally underwrote the expansion of the county while starving the city of capital.
Factually speaking, that combination of factors essentially resorted the region's demographics and capital stack. And the modern consequence of this 170-year history is what real estate professionals and appraisers refer to as the border effect.
The price wall. This concept in the materials completely blew my mind.
It's fascinating, right?
It really is. The idea that two houses can literally sit one block apart. They can be built in the exact same decade, have the same square footage, the exact same architectural style, but they have radically different market values simply because one falls under the city's jurisdiction and one falls under the county's.
It is a stark physical manifestation of municipal policy. The materials provide some excellent real-world boundary zones to illustrate this. Look at the border between Dundalk in the county and the immediately adjacent city neighborhoods.
Or Parkville in the county versus Hamilton in the city.
Yes, or Catonsville versus West Baltimore. In all these specific zones, valuation algorithms and human appraisers observe a sharp demarcation in value and buyer behavior the absolute second you cross that invisible 1851 line.
Because it all compounds. I imagine a buyer's agent walking a client through this. They aren't just looking at the house. They're looking at the monthly escrow payment. If the property tax is double on the city side, that radically reduces the amount of house a buyer can qualify for on a 30-year mortgage.
It's a highly compounded formula. When evaluating these border properties, appraisers and buyers are factoring in that doubled tax rate, absolutely, but they are also pricing in the differences in the school districts, the perceived quality of municipal services, which covers everything from the frequency of trash collection to the speed of snow removal.
It touches everything.
It even impacts the condition of the local roads and differences in homeowners' insurance risk profiles. All of those individual line items stack up to create that massive valuation wall.
So what does this all mean for the shape of the region as a whole? You've got this fixed shrinking core and this booming, heavily funded outer ring. It feels like a very specific spatial pattern.
It creates a well-documented phenomenon in urban planning known as donut urbanism.
Donut urbanism.
Yeah.
It's a highly visual way to think about a macroeconomic model.
It is incredibly descriptive of the capital flow. Imagine a donut. The economic activity, the new commercial development, the retail centers, and the rising residential property values all shift outward into the expanding suburbs.
The dough of the donut.
Exactly. What gets left behind in the middle is the hole. An urban core that struggles with a hollowed-out tax-based aging infrastructure and a concentration of economic challenges.
A city frozen in its 80-square-mile pot, surrounded by a thriving 682-square-mile yard. But here is the twist in our deep dive today that I found so compelling.
The investment side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You might hear all of this, the donut urbanism, the double taxes, the shrinking population, and assume this region is a dead zone for investment. But the sources indicate the exact opposite. Real estate investors from Washington, D.C., from New York private equity firms, and even overseas buyers are absolutely obsessed with this area.
They are.
The text referred to it as a developer's playground. Why on earth is institutional capital flowing into a root-bound city?
It seems counterintuitive until you look at the macroeconomic picture of the East Coast as a whole. This region is a developer's playground precisely because of its relative affordability. If an institutional investor compares the Baltimore region to major nearby metropolitan areas like Washington, D.C. or New York, the barrier to entry is remarkably low.
You've got cheaper dirt, relatively speaking, but you still have massive, stable employment hubs. The Port of Baltimore is an international economic engine. You have major global medical systems and universities anchored in the city.
Plus the transit.
Right? You have that direct transit proximity to D.C. You can jump on a train and be in the nation's capital in under an hour. That combination of high economic connectivity and low acquisition cost is incredibly attractive to capital.
Exactly. And because of that stark, legally defined line between the city and the Caron County, these investors don't just treat the area as one homogeneous market. They deploy highly specialized, predictable strategy zones, depending entirely on which side of the boundary they are operating on.
Let's break those strategies down, because this is how modern real estate portfolios are actually built. Let's start with the city strategy. If a private equity group or a local investor is buying inside that 80-square-mile pot, what is the playbook?
The city strategy is fundamentally a high-yield cash flow play. Because the purchase prices are significantly lower, the rental income generated relative to the acquisition cost is much higher than you'll find in the suburbs.
So they're buying older properties.
Yes, investors here are dealing almost exclusively with older housing stock, primarily performing row house rehabs. It's an older, denser brick-and-mortar operation. The operational risk is certainly higher. You are dealing with 100-year-old plumbing, higher regulatory scrutiny, and double the property taxes. But the monthly cash flow can be exceptionally strong.
Lower entry cost, higher yield, but you are taking on the maintenance burden of the 19th century.
Got it. Now, what happens when that same investor crosses the invisible line into the county? What is the county strategy?
The county strategy is an appreciation and liquidity play. The purchase prices are higher, so the barrier to entry is steeper, and the rental yields are tighter. But the end buyer in the county is usually a traditional retail buyer.
A family looking for a primary residence rather than another investor. Precisely. You are dealing heavily with post-war suburban homes, single-family detached houses with yards. And the biggest advantage for an investor here is faster resale liquidity. Because of the favorable tax rates, the school districts and the suburban infrastructure renovated homes in the county generally sell much faster on the open market.
You're flipping a 1960s rancher to a family rather than renting out a 1910 row house. And the sources specifically highlight hot spots in the county that these investors target. Neighborhoods like Essex Parkville and Middle River.
The classic post-war ring.
Exactly. These are all sitting right there in that post-war suburban ring. They aren't the brand new massive estates an hour out of town, but they offer that sweet spot of strong resale demand and suburban amenities without being astronomically expensive to acquire.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it becomes clear that sophisticated investors aren't just looking at a flat map of a city and a county. They are looking at a chronological map of American development. The text synthesizes this entire region into three distinct rings. which is a vital mental model for anyone trying to understand urban life cycles or how buying algorithms evaluate property.
Walk us through the three rings, because once you understand this framework, it completely changes how you view a metropolitan area.
Ring number one is the urban core. These are the pre-1940 row houses and commercial buildings. High-density aging infrastructure, high taxes, but strong cash flow potential for investors.
That's the city.
Right. Ring number two is the post-war suburbs. These are the homes built roughly between the 1950s and the 1970s. This is Essex Parkville, the immediate areas right over the city line. Medium density, a stable tax base, and a highly liquid market for renovations.
And the third.
Finally, ring number three consists of the outer commuter suburbs. These are properties built from the 1980s to the present day. Large lots, high price points furthest from the urban center, but offering the newest infrastructure and the lowest maintenance overhead.
Pre-1940 core middle ring from the 50s to the 70s, and the outer ring from the 80s to today.
Yeah,
Each ring behaves entirely differently in terms of price, risk, and investment strategy.
they're completely different markets.
If you understand those layers, you have a serious analytical edge. You aren't just looking at a house, you are evaluating its specific place in a 170-year timeline of policy and development. It's just incredible to think that a legislative decision made in 1851, before the Civil War, before the invention of the automobile, before modern zoning even existed, is still the fundamental DNA dictating whether an investor from New York buys a row house for cash flow or a suburban rancher for a flip.
It's all connected.
We have covered so much ground today. From an obscure 1851 legal divorce that froze a city in time, to the post-war migrations and federal policies that built the suburbs, to the massive tax disparities that created a literal price wall. And finally, to the donut urbanism that keeps this region a wildly active developer's playground today. It really goes to show that historical context is an absolute superpower for understanding how the modern world actually functions.
It really is.
So as you digest all of this, what stands out to you? Next time you cross a municipal line, are you going to look at the houses differently? Are you going to wonder what the tax disparity is between the left side of the street and the right side of the street? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep looking past the invisible lines, and we will catch you on the next one. But before we go, I want to toss it over for one final thought.
This raises an important question, something that takes all of this historical data and pushes it right to the edge of the future. As remote work continues to decouple where we live from where we work, what happens to these rigid 170-year-old borders? If people no longer need to commute to an urban core or even a suburban office park, will the whole spatial concept of donut urbanism eventually collapse as populations move freely to wherever they want? Or conversely, will those massive property tax disparities cause these invisible lines to become even more fiercely defended in the digital age as remote workers hyper-optimize their personal balance sheets?